A millionaire caught a boy stealing from his restaurant. Unexpectedly, the next day, he contacted a prosecutor to... The low hum of fluorescent lights buzzed faintly in the empty dining room as Martin Campbell strolled past the rows of polished mahogany tables. The space, with its muted tones and understated elegance, bore the signature of his success, his pride at 37. Maple and Oak was one of Las Vegas's most sought-after dining experiences. However, tonight, amidst the quiet opulence, Martin's thoughts were not focused on accolades or Michelin stars. He had come here to immerse himself in the operation and gain first-hand insight. He pushed open the swinging door to the kitchen, the faint aroma of rosemary and seared butter still lingering in the air. A steel symphony of knives, pans, and utensils reflected the glow of overhead lights. His footsteps echoed on the tiled floor as he scanned the room for anything amiss. Everything seemed in place. Then he saw it, a faint shadow slipping along the far wall, quick and deliberate. Martin's brow furrowed. He stepped quietly behind a towering rack of spices, eyes narrowing as the figure moved closer to the prep station. The intruder couldn't have been more than 10 years old. The intruder's frame was wiry, his clothes worn and patched. The boy darted toward a tray of freshly baked bread, swiping a loaf and tucking it under his arm with practiced efficiency. Martin stayed hidden, curiosity outweighing the urge to intervene. He watched as the boy glanced around nervously, then scurried out through the back door, leaving it ajar. Stepping into the crisp night air, Martin adjusted his blazer and followed at a distance. The city was quieter in this part of town, far from the cacophony of neon signs and casino floors. The boy moved quickly, weaving through narrow alleys and side streets. Martin's polished loafers contrasted sharply with the boy's scuffed sneakers as they crossed cracked pavement littered with the remnants of someone else's forgotten life. Finally, the boy dove into a dimly lit alley, slipping through the gap in a chain-link fence. Martin hesitated for a moment, his shadow stretching tall against the graffiti-stained walls, then followed. He found himself at the edge of a makeshift shelter, a tangle of cardboard blankets and plastic tarps. The boy crouched beside a small figure nestled under a threadbare quilt. "Here, Ash," the boy whispered, pulling out the bread. He tore off a piece and handed it to the child, his sister, Martin guessed, from the way she clung to him. The girl, no older than 4, reached for the bread with trembling hands. Her face was pale, her cheeks sunken, and her hair hung limp around her narrow shoulders. She bit into the bread ravenously, crumbs dusting her small hands. "Thanks, Jason," Ashley said tremblingly. Martin's breath hitched. The sight of the 2 children, scraping together survival in a world that had clearly failed them, stirred something deep within him. He shifted his weight, causing a loose can to rattle across the pavement. The boy's head snapped up, eyes wide with alarm. He shoved the bread behind him and moved protectively in front of the girl. "Who's there?" His voice cracked, a mix of defiance and fear. Martin stepped forward, careful to keep his movements measured. The boy's gaze darted to the exit behind him, but Martin raised a hand, palm out. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said calmly. His voice carried the weight of authority, softened by genuine concern. "Then why are you following me?" the boy demanded, his body taut like a coiled spring. Martin crouched slightly to meet the boy's eye level, though his expensive shoes protested against the uneven ground. "I saw you in the kitchen," he admitted. "You're excellent at being quiet, but not excellent enough." The boy glared, but didn't respond. The girl peeked out from behind him, her large eyes flickering with curiosity and wariness. "You're Jason, right?" Martin guessed, studying the boy's reaction. Jason flinched but didn't deny it. "I own that restaurant," Martin continued, gesturing toward the direction they'd come from. "And if you're stealing bread, I'm guessing it's not for fun." Jason's jaw tightened, but before he could snap back, Martin added, What's her name? He nodded toward the girl. Jason hesitated. Ashley, he said finally, his voice softening as he glanced at her. Martin straightened, his hand moving instinctively to his pocket, where his wallet rested. You both look like you need a decent meal and a safe place for the night, he said. Come with me. Jason's eyes narrowed, suspicion written all over his face. Why would you help us? Martin paused, considering his words. Because I can, he said simply, and because someone should. Ashley tugged at Jason's sleeve, her voice a mere whisper. I'm cold. The boy looked at her, then at Martin. His reluctance was evident, yet Ashley's need overshadowed his hesitation. Jason gradually nodded. Martin turned, leading the way out of the alley. The soft shuffle of 2 pairs of small feet behind him filled the silence. This wasn't just charity. It was a beginning. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing Martin's penthouse. Jason hesitated on the threshold, his thin frame stiff with tension. Ashley clutched his hand, her small fingers gripping tightly, as if letting go might send her tumbling into the vast, unfamiliar space. The room featured sleek lines and shimmering surfaces, striking a stark contrast to the cracked pavement and dingy alleys they had previously traversed. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the glowing skyline of Las Vegas, while polished marble floors reflected the overhead lights like rippling water. The air smelled faintly of cedar and citrus, clean and foreign. Jason's eyes darted around, taking in every detail, every potential exit. It's big, he muttered, his voice barely audible. Martin smiled faintly and stepped aside, giving them space. He spoke in a casual tone, encouraging them to feel at home. There's no rush. Ashley's gaze flicked up to Jason, seeking his approval. He nodded once, a barely perceptible motion, and led her into the room. They moved cautiously, like animals testing the boundaries of a trap. Martin watched them with quiet patience. He understood Jason's wariness. It was the wariness of someone who had learned too young that trust often led to pain. He decided not to push, letting them adjust at their own pace. I'll grab some food, Martin said, heading toward the kitchen. His steps were deliberate, unhurried. The last thing he wanted was to make them feel cornered. Jason and Ashley lingered near the entryway. The boy's eyes followed Martin's every movement, sharp and calculating. Ashley, meanwhile, edged closer to a plush armchair, her fingers brushing the fabric tentatively. The sound of cupboards opening and closing filled the silence. A few minutes later, Martin returned with a tray. He set it on the coffee table, a simple spread of sandwiches, fruit, and juice. Nothing fancy, Martin said lightly, stepping back to give them space. But it should do for now. Jason eyed the food suspiciously. Why are you doing this? He asked, his tone clipped. Martin met his gaze steadily. Because you need it. That's not an answer, Jason countered, though his grip on Ashley's hand loosened slightly. Martin folded his arms, leaning casually against the back of the couch. You're right, it's not. But it's the truth. Jason didn't reply. After a long pause, he let Ashley tug him toward the table. She reached for a sandwich with trembling hands, devouring it in eager bites. Jason took a slower approach, his eyes never leaving Martin as he ate. Martin didn't press. He let the silence stretch, watching the children settle. If not into comfort, then at least into something close to it. After they finished, Martin gestured toward the hallway. There's a guest room down there, he said. It's yours for as long as you need it. The bathroom's stocked with fresh towels. Take your time. Jason hesitated. We're fine here, he said quickly. Martin's expression didn't waver. You can stay here, he said evenly, but Ashley looks like she could use a bed. It's warm and it's quiet. No one's going to bother you. Jason's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He glanced at Ashley, who was nodding sleepily, her eyes half closed. "I'll show you," Martin offered, leading the way. Jason followed reluctantly, keeping a hand on Ashley's shoulder. Despite its modesty in comparison to the rest of the penthouse, the guest room felt like a haven. A soft bed with crisp white sheets, a reading lamp, and a window overlooking the city made it feel inviting, but not overwhelming. Ashley climbed onto the bed immediately, curling up with a sigh. Jason stayed near the door, his back pressed against the frame. "Good night," Martin said quietly, stepping away. "I'll be in the living room if you need anything." Jason nodded, his eyes guarded. Later, as Martin tidied up the living room, he spotted their few belongings, a backpack and a tattered blanket. As he folded the blanket, something rigid and metallic slid onto the table. Martin picked it up. It was a badge, small and intricately designed, its edges worn, but its symbol unmistakable. Immediately, he recognized it as a mark associated with Victor Bennett, a name often associated with negative connotations in Las Vegas. His fingers tightened round the badge and his jaw set. This wasn't just a case of a struggling family. Something much darker tangled the threads of their story. Martin placed the badge back in the bag carefully, his mind racing. He glanced toward the closed door of the bedroom where Jason and Ashley slept, their breaths soft and even. He had thought taking them in was an act of kindness. Now, he realized, it might be the beginning of something far more dangerous. The morning light filtered through the penthouse's expansive windows, bathing the room in a pale golden glow. Martin sat at the dining table, his laptop open, and a cup of coffee cooling beside him. The badge lay on the glass surface, its intricate design catching the light. His fingers hovered over his phone before he finally dialed. The call connected after 2 rings. "Gibson Investigations," a gruff voice answered. "Peter," Martin said, "it's me. I've got something I need you to look into." "Morning to you too," Peter replied dryly. "What's the urgency?" Martin glanced toward the hallway, where Jason and Ashley still slept. "I found something last night. A badge symbol looks familiar. It appears to be associated with Victor Bennett." There was a pause on the other end. "Victor Bennett," Peter echoed, his tone sharpening. "You're not really getting involved with that man, are you?" "It's not about me," Martin said firmly. "It's about 2 kids. They're caught up in something I don't fully understand. And I need answers." Peter sighed, the sound heavy with reluctance. "Send me a picture. I'll see what I can dig up." After ending the call, Martin stared at the badge again, his thoughts churning. In this city, the name Victor Bennett held significant weight, causing people to be cautious and remain silent. If these kids were somehow linked to him, the risks were higher than he'd anticipated. Jason emerged an hour later, his steps cautious as he approached the kitchen. Martin looked up from his laptop, offering a faint smile. "Good morning?" Jason nodded, his eyes darting to the badge on the table before quickly looking away. "Ashley's still sleeping," he said, his voice measured. "Good," Martin replied, closing his laptop. "She needs the rest." Jason lingered by the counter, his thin frame silhouetted against the morning light. "What's that?" he asked suddenly, nodding toward the badge. Martin didn't answer immediately. He picked up the badge, turning it over in his hands. Finally, he said, "I discovered something in your bag last night. I was hoping you'd tell me what it means." Jason's face tightened. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing," Martin countered, his tone firm but not unkind. "That symbol is associated with a dangerous individual. Someone you don't want to be involved with." Jason's shoulders tensed, and he glanced toward the hallway, as if checking that Ashley wasn't listening. "We're not involved with him," he muttered. "Not anymore." Victor Bennett, Martin said, watching the boy's reaction closely. That name means anything to you? Jason's expression darkened. He crossed his arms over his chest, the defensive posture making him look even smaller. He's the reason we're here, he said, after a long pause. The reason we don't have a home. Martin waited, letting the silence encourage Jason to continue. The boy hesitated, then dropped into the chair across from him, his hands curling into fists on the table. My dad, Jason began, his voice low. He worked for Victor, did things for him, things I don't know much about. But one day, he said we had to leave. He stated that the situation had become unsafe. Victor didn't like that. Your dad, Martin prompted gently. What happened to him? Jason shrugged, the motion forced. He told us to go, me and Ashley. He said he'd find us later, but he never did. The boy's voice wavered and he quickly looked away. I don't know if he's even alive. Martin's chest tightened as the boy's quiet resilience resonated deeply. His phone buzzed on the table before he could reply. Peter's name flashed on the screen. He picked up. What did you find? More than you're going to like, Peter said grimly. The badge belongs to a group Victor uses for his operations, muscle for hire enforcers, that kind of thing. But that's not the worst part. Martin's grip on the phone tightened. Go on. Victor's network isn't just about smuggling and gambling, Peter continued. He's got his hands in human trafficking, illegal drugs, the works. What happens to those who attempt to escape? They don't get far. If the kid's dad tried to leave, there's a likely chance Victor put a target on his back. Martin's jaw clenched. He glanced at Jason, who was staring intently at the badge. What about the kids? He asked, lowering his voice. Do you think Victor knows where they are? Hard to say, Peter admitted, but if he does, they're in danger. You need to be careful, Martin. This isn't something you can fix on your own. Martin ended the call and set the phone down, his mind racing. Jason watched him warily, sensing the shift in his demeanor. What is it? The boy asked, his voice small. Martin met his gaze, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. It means, he said carefully, you and Ashley might be in more trouble than you thought. Jason's face paled, but he didn't speak. Martin stood, his determination hardening. You're not alone in this, Martin said firmly. We'll figure it out. For the first time, Jason didn't argue. He simply nodded, the spark of trust flickering faintly in his wary eyes. The penthouse felt unusually quiet that evening, the hum of the city beyond its glass walls, a distant, muffled rhythm. Martin leaned against the counter, his thoughts circling the conversation with Peter. He had spent the day piecing together fragments of the puzzle, yet every answer seemed to lead to more troubling questions. Jason sat at the dining table, and Ashley perched in his lap, absently twirling the edge of her shirt. Her eyes drooped, heavy with exhaustion. Jason, however, was wide awake, his expression guarded as he studied Martin across the room. You said my dad might have targeted his back, Jason said abruptly, breaking the silence. His voice carried a hint of defiance, as if daring Martin to tell him anything less than the truth. Martin turned, meeting the boy's gaze. It's possible, he admitted. Victor Bennett doesn't let people leave his operation easily. Your dad likely knew the risks. Jason's jaw tightened, his hand resting protectively on Ashley's shoulder. He didn't tell us much, he murmured. Just that we had to run. He said he'd come for us, but... He trailed off, his gaze dropping to the floor. Tell me about that night, Martin prompted gently. He kept his tone steady, careful not to push too hard. Jason hesitated, glancing at Ashley, but when Martin stepped forward with a reassuring nod, he began to speak. It had been raining that night. Jason remembered the sharp scent of wet concrete and the distant rumble of thunder. His father, Caleb, had burst into their cramped apartment, his face pale and drawn. "Pack a bag," Caleb had said, his voice taut with urgency. "Only what you can carry." Jason had frozen, staring at his father in confusion. "What's going on?" "No time to explain," Caleb snapped. Then, softening, he crouched in front of Jason, gripping his shoulders. "You need to trust me, son. Take your sister and go to the address I wrote down. I'll meet you there." As instructed, Jason packed clothes and snacks into a backpack, while Caleb whispered urgently to their mother, Mary. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she packed a smaller bag for Ashley. "Why can't we all go together?" Jason inquired, his voice cracking with fear. Mary kneeled beside him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "It's not safe for all of us to leave at once," she said, her voice trembling. "You and Ashley will be safer if we split up. We'll find you, I promise." She had kissed his forehead, her tears dampening his cheek, before ushering him and Ashley out the door. They had run through the rain-soaked streets, Jason clutching Ashley's hand tightly as she struggled to keep up. Behind them, the faint echoes of shouting had followed, growing distant as they ducked into alleyways and boarded an outbound bus. They never saw Caleb or Mary again. Jason's voice cracked as he finished the story. He blinked rapidly, refusing to let tears fall. Ashley, half asleep in his lap, shifted, nestling closer to him. Martin felt a lump rise in his throat. "You were brave," he said quietly. "Both of you." Jason shrugged, his face hardened. "Didn't have a choice." Martin was moved by the boy's words, which evoked memories he seldom revisited. Though the details were different, loss and uncertainty had marked his own childhood. He knew what it was like to feel alone and to carry burdens too heavy for a child. "You're not alone anymore," Martin said, his voice steady. "Whatever happens, I'll help you figure this out." Jason's gaze softened, the wall of distrust lowering slightly. He didn't respond, but his silence carried a tentative acceptance. Late that night, Martin's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Peter's name flashed on the screen. "Got something?" Peter said without preamble. "Rumor has it Caleb's still alive. People have spotted him lurking around Victor's territory, maintaining a low profile." Martin straightened, his pulse quickening. "Are you sure?" "With these kinds of things, there's always uncertainty," Peter acknowledged. "But it's a solid lead. If Caleb's alive, he's in hiding. For a beneficial reason." Martin glanced toward the guest room, where Jason and Ashley slept. The news was both a relief and a new source of tension. Although Caleb's survival offered hope for a reunion, it also indicated that he remained entangled in Victor's web. "Send me the details," Martin said. "I'll figure out the next steps." Peter hesitated. "Be careful, Martin. You're not dealing with amateurs." "I know," Martin replied, his tone resolute. "But I can't let this go." As he ended the call, Martin stared out at the city lights, his mind racing. The stakes had escalated, yet his determination remained unwavering. For Jason, Ashley, and Caleb, he would see this through, no matter what it took. A few days later, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished floors of Maple and Oak, Martin's flagship restaurant. The usual buzz of diners was absent, leaving the space quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the muted clink of staff polishing cutlery. Martin stood by the counter, leaning against the cool marble, his brow furrowed in thought. Across from him, Peter Gibson sat with his coffee untouched, his demeanor uncharacteristically tense. "You're biting off a lot here," Peter said, breaking the silence. He leaned forward, his gruff tone edged with concern. "Victor Bennett isn't just another crook. He's got people everywhere, cops, judges, you name it." Martin sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. I know what I'm up against, Peter, but I can't do this alone. I need someone who can navigate that world, someone with the guts and resources to help. Peter nodded slowly, his fingers tapping on the rim of his coffee cup. There's one name that comes to mind: Isabel Vega. Martin looked up, recognition flickering in his eyes. The prosecutor. She's taken down people like Victor before, Peter confirmed. She's ruthless in court, but fair. If anyone can help you, it's her. Martin crossed his arms, considering. Is she the kind to stick her neck out? Is it for the right cause? Absolutely, Peter replied, meeting Martin's gaze. But you'd better make a damn compelling case for her to get involved. She doesn't take risks lightly. Martin straightened, his decision made. Then, I'll make sure she understands what's at stake. If we're going to do this, we'll need someone like Isabel. Peter smirked faintly, his tone laced with irony. Good luck. She's not easily impressed. Martin grabbed his coat, determination hardening in his expression. Neither am I. The heavy oak door of Isabel Vega's office bore a polished brass nameplate that read, Isabel Vega, Assistant U.S. Attorney. Martin hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. The scent of aged leather and freshly brewed coffee filled the air. Isabel sat at her desk, framed by rows of neatly stacked legal files. She glanced up, her sharp hazel eyes locking onto Martin's. You don't usually show up without warning, she said, gesturing for him to sit. What's this about? Martin settled into the chair, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. He placed the badge on her desk. Its dull metallic gleam seemed out of place against the tidy surface. Victor Bennett, he said simply. Isabel's brow furrowed as she picked up the badge, her fingers tracing its edges. I know this symbol, she said, her tone flat. What's your connection? Martin hesitated, carefully considering his words. I've taken in 2 kids, Jason and Ashley. Their father worked for Victor and tried to leave. He didn't make it out clean. Now it appears that Victor's web has entangled their entire family. Isabel's lips tightened. She set the badge down and leaned back, her gaze sharp and appraising. Victor never allows unresolved issues to disappear. If their father is still alive, he is either hiding or under attack. And if Victor catches wind that you're protecting those kids. She didn't finish, letting the implication hang. I can handle myself, Martin said firmly. But this isn't about me, it's about them. I need to know how to keep them safe, and how to stop him. Isabel tapped a pen against her desk, her eyes narrowing as she processed the situation. Martin, you're putting yourself in danger. Victor's network, deeply rooted in trafficking, smuggling and extortion, has a vast reach. It's not solely about him, it's also about the system he has established. If you go after him, you'll have to take on all of it. Martin's jaw tightened. I'm not looking to start a war. I just want to protect those kids and help them find their father. Isabel leaned forward, her tone softening but still firm. If you involve the authorities, it puts a target on their backs. Victor has informants everywhere, even in law enforcement. Keeping this quiet might be your best bet for now. Martin's gaze drifted to the badge on her desk. And if keeping it quiet means letting him keep doing what he's doing, Isabel sighed, crossing her arms. That's the moral trap, isn't it? You can't save them without risking others. You can't stop him without putting yourself and those kids directly in the line of fire. The room fell silent. Martin felt the weight of her words settle over him, but his resolve didn't waver. I'll take the risk, he said finally. I won't let them suffer because of what someone else did. Isabel studied him for a long moment before nodding. If you're serious about this, I'll help you as much as I can. But you need to be careful, Martin. Victor isn't just a criminal. He's an institution. Taking him down requires precision, not bravado. Back at the penthouse, the city lights cast long shadows across the room as Martin mulled over Isabel's warnings. Jason sat at the dining table, sketching on a scrap of paper, while Ashley played nearby. "You were gone a long time," Jason said without looking up. "I had to talk to someone," Martin replied, sitting down across from him. "Someone who knows how to deal with people like Victor." Jason's pencil stilled. "And?" Martin leaned forward, his voice calm but steady. "We have to be smart about this. Victor's dangerous, and going after him means taking risks. But we'll figure it out. Together." Jason met his gaze, the flicker of trust that had been growing between them now a little brighter. "I want Ashley to be safe." "She won't," Martin assured him. "Not while I'm here." Jason nodded slowly, his grip on the pencil tightening. "What about my dad?" Martin hesitated. "There's a chance he's alive, but if he is, he's in hiding." Jason looked down at his drawing, a crude outline of a house with two small figures standing outside. "I just want my family back," he murmured. Martin's chest tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he placed a hand on Jason's shoulder, the gesture firm and steady. "We'll find him," he promised. Later that night, as the apartment settled into silence, Martin's phone buzzed. It was Peter. "I found something," Peter said. "There's a lot of chatter in Victor's circle about Caleb. Word is, he's been sending out messages. Coded, low profile. He's looking for someone." Martin felt a flutter in his heart. "Mary?" "Most likely," Peter confirmed. "But if Caleb's trying to reach her, it means he's still in the game, whether he likes it or not. And if Victor gets wind of this..." Martin's hand tightened around the phone. "Then we have to move fast." Peter sighed. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "Not a chance." As the call ended, Martin stared out at the glittering city, his mind already turning over the next steps. Despite the heightened stakes, Martin remained resolute. Jason and Ashley deserved answers, and Caleb deserved a chance to find his family again. No matter how dangerous the path, Martin wouldn't stop until they had their chance. The restaurant was silent, save for the faint ticking of a wall clock. Martin stood behind the bar, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand, the quiet weight of the night pressing on his shoulders. He had just finished locking up when the faint creak of the back door caught his attention. His instincts sharpened, and he stepped into the shadows, his eyes fixed on the doorway. A figure emerged, limping and hunched, the dim overhead lights catching on a bruised face and a torn jacket. "Caleb." "Martin!" the man croaked, his voice rough and raw. His gaze darted around the room, landing on Martin's silhouette. "Who are you?" Martin demanded, stepping into the light, his voice steady but cautious. Caleb staggered forward, holding up a hand in a gesture of peace. "I'm Caleb, Jason and Ashley's father." His words were hoarse, laden with exhaustion. "I need your help." Martin studied him, noting the gash on Caleb's forehead and the desperation in his eyes. Without a word, he gestured to a chair. Caleb sank into it heavily, his breath ragged. "They're safe," Martin said after a moment, pouring a glass of water and setting it in front of Caleb. "Jason and Ashley, they're with me." Caleb's head dropped into his hands, his shoulders trembling. Relief, guilt, and anguish radiated from him in waves. "Thank God," he whispered. I thought I'd lost them." Martin waited, giving the man a moment to compose himself. Finally, Caleb straightened, his jaw tightening as resolve hardened in his expression. "I'll take you to them." The ride back to the penthouse was silent, save for Caleb's labored breathing. By the time they arrived, the adrenaline that had kept him upright seemed to fade. Martin helped him into the elevator, his grip firm on Caleb's arm. When the doors opened, Jason was sitting on the couch, sketching by the soft glow of a lamp. Ashley lay curled up beside him, fast asleep. The boy looked up as Martin entered, his pencil pausing mid-stroke. His eyes widened when he saw Caleb. "Dad?" Jason's voice was barely audible, his expression a blend of disbelief and cautious hope. Caleb stepped forward, his movements unsteady. "Jason!" Jason sprang to his feet, the sketchbook tumbling to the floor. He crossed the room in a few strides, hesitating for a brief moment before throwing his arms around Caleb. "You're alive!" Jason choked out, his voice cracking. "I thought—" His words broke off as a sob escaped him. Caleb's arms wrapped tightly around his son, his face crumpling. "I'm so sorry," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I never wanted to leave you. I thought I was doing what was best." Jason pulled back slightly, his hands gripping Caleb's jacket. "You said you'd come back. Why didn't you come back?" Caleb looked away, guilt etched deep into his features. "I tried. But Victor, he's everywhere. I couldn't risk leading him to you and Ashley." At the sound of her name, Ashley stirred. She rubbed her eyes, blinking sleepily. When she saw Caleb, her face lit up. "Daddy?" Caleb crouched, wincing as he held out his arms. "I'm here, sweetheart." Ashley stumbled toward him, burying her face in his shoulder. "I missed you." Caleb clung to her, his tears falling freely now. "I missed you too." Later, after Jason and Ashley had fallen asleep, curled up next to their father, Martin sat across from Caleb in the living room. Exhaustion lined Caleb's face, but determination burned in his eyes. "I need your help," Caleb said, breaking the silence. "Victor has Mary. He's using her to keep me in line." Martin leaned forward, his expression grim. "Do you know where she is?" "Not exactly," Caleb admitted. "But I've been tracking his movements. She's being kept somewhere in his main territory." Martin exhaled slowly, the weight of the situation settling over him. "You know this won't be easy. Victor won't hesitate to kill anyone who gets in his way." "I know," Caleb said, his voice steady. "But I can't leave her there. I've failed my family enough already. I need to do this, for Jason, for Ashley, and for Mary." Martin studied him, noting the raw resolve in Caleb's eyes. "Then we'll do it together. But we'll need a plan, and allies." Caleb nodded, the first flicker of hope crossing his face. "Whatever it takes." As Martin watched Caleb settle into the couch beside his children, a faint sense of resolve filled the room. The morning sunlight spilled through the restaurant's wide windows, illuminating the polished surfaces of maple and oak. The space was empty, save for a small gathering at one of the private back tables. Caleb sat hunched over, his bruises now faint, but still visible. His gaze kept drifting to his phone, where a photo of Jason and Ashley stared back at him. A shot Martin had taken before leaving the penthouse that morning. Martin leaned against the table, his arms crossed as he addressed the room. Beside him sat Isabel Vega, sharp and composed, her suit immaculate despite the early hour. Peter Gibson stood nearby, sipping coffee, his expression unreadable as he listened. Martin began, his tone steady yet urgent. "Victor has a firm hold on this city, and if Caleb is correct, he is holding Mary in one of his safe houses. The longer we wait, the harder it'll be to get her out." Isabel tapped her pen against her notepad, her brows knitting together. "Getting Mary out is one thing, but dismantling Victor's operation presents a unique challenge." "We don't need to dismantle everything," Caleb interjected, his voice rough but firm. "We just need to find her and get her out." "And then what?" Isabel shot back, her gaze piercing. Victor doesn't let people walk away, Caleb. Victor does not allow anyone to walk away, including you, Mary, and your children. If we don't remove his influence, you'll live a life of constant surveillance. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Martin stepped in, his tone calming. We'll do both. Focus on Mary first, but gather enough evidence along the way to weaken Victor's empire. Isabel, can you work on that angle? She nodded reluctantly. I'll need something solid. Paper trails, testimonies, anything we can use to tie him to his crimes. Without that, he'll wriggle out of this like he always does. Caleb leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. I can give you everything you need. I know his operations, his suppliers, his routes, even some of his aliases. But getting that information means getting close, and that's not going to be easy. Peter, who had been silent until now, set his coffee down with a soft clink. Close isn't impossible. You know how Victor works, Caleb. You know his patterns. Using that to our advantage may reduce the need to get close. Isabel turned to Martin. And you? What resources can you pull? Martin's lips twitched into a faint smile. I have a few favors I can call in. I can provide security, transport, and potentially even a safe house or two. My network is secure. Victor doesn't have any influence in my realm. And the money? Peter asked pointedly. Martin didn't hesitate. Whatever it takes. As the conversation unfolded, the tension between Caleb and Martin began to ease. Caleb's initial mistrust had softened into a reluctant camaraderie. Martin, for his part, admired Caleb's grit, even as he recognized the desperation fueling it. During a brief pause, Caleb spoke, his voice low. Thank you for taking care of Jason and Ashley. I don't think I could have faced them if they weren't safe. Martin nodded. They're wonderful kids. They deserve better than this. Caleb's gaze darkened. That's why I'm doing this. I can't fail them again. Martin placed a firm hand on Caleb's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity. We won't let that happen. By the end of the meeting, a tentative plan had formed. Isabel would begin compiling evidence based on Caleb's intel, while Peter mapped out potential infiltration points. Caleb described a location deep in Victor's territory, an old warehouse fortified with security, where he suspected Mary might be held. It's not just a safe house, Caleb said, pointing to a map on the table. It's a hub. Victor uses it to move shipments, drugs, weapons, and people. If Mary's there, she's not alone. The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled over them. Isabel broke the silence, her voice calm but resolute. Then we hit the hub. If we can pull this off, we'll save Mary and cripple Victor's operations in one move. Martin nodded, his jaw set. It's a start. As the group dispersed, Caleb lingered by the window, his gaze fixed on the street below. Martin joined him, the two men standing side by side in silence. You think we can pull this off? Caleb asked quietly. Martin's expression softened. We have to. For a moment, Caleb's eyes reflected something akin to hope. Then he turned away, the steel of determination settling over him once more. The fight was just beginning. Night settled over the city, dimming the restaurant's lights. Jason and Ashley sat in a booth near the kitchen, their small forms illuminated by the warm glow of a single hanging bulb. Caleb knelt in front of them, his hands resting on Jason's shoulders. The boy's face was tense, his lips pressed into a thin line. Ashley clung to his arm, her wide eyes brimming with unspoken fear. I'll be back, Caleb said softly, his voice trembling despite his attempt to sound reassuring. You have to trust Emily, okay? They'll take care of you. Jason swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. You'll come back, right? Caleb hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded firmly. "I promise." Ashley's small hand reached out to touch his face. "Don't hurt yourself, Daddy." Caleb's chest tightened, but he managed a smile. "I'll be careful. You be beneficial for Emily, all right?" Emily, the restaurant's manager, stood nearby, her usually brisk demeanor softened by the scene. "I'll keep them safe, Caleb. You just focus on what you need to do." Caleb rose, pressing a kiss to Ashley's forehead and giving Jason's shoulder one last squeeze before stepping back. Martin, standing by the door, caught his eye and gave a brief nod. It was time. The black SUV moved through the city's outskirts, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Martin sat in the front seat, scanning the route ahead, while Peter drove in silence. Caleb and Isabel occupied the back, their voices low as they went over the plan one final time. "The warehouse is heavily guarded," Caleb said, his tone grim. "Victor's men rotate shifts, but there's always a skeleton crew inside. Security cameras cover the main entrances, and there's likely a hidden exit in case things go south." Peter grunted, keeping his eyes on the road. "How do we get in without setting off alarms?" Caleb pointed to a map spread out on his lap. "There's a service entrance at the back. Deliveries use this less secure, yet still monitored entrance. We'll need to disable the cameras and take out the guards quickly." "And once we're inside?" Isabel asked, her voice calm but edged with steel. "Mary's likely on the second floor," Caleb replied. "Victor uses the upper levels for his most valuable assets." His voice faltered briefly, but he pushed through. "Sir, that's where we'll find her." Martin turned to look over his shoulder. "We stick to the plan. No improvising unless absolutely necessary." Caleb's eyes met his, determination flickering behind the exhaustion. "Got it." The group arrived just past midnight. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking structure bathed in the eerie glow of a few scattered floodlights. Shadows moved along the perimeter, guards patrolling the grounds with slow, deliberate strides. Peter parked a few blocks away, and they continued on foot, their steps muffled by the dirt path. Caleb led the way, his movements cautious but purposeful. Martin followed close behind, his senses sharp, every muscle in his body coiled for action. When they reached the service entrance, Isabel produced a small device from her bag. She connected it to the keypad, her fingers flying across the controls. "This should scramble the feed," she murmured, "but we'll need to move fast." The lock clicked open, and Caleb pushed the door slightly ajar, peering inside. Crates and machinery lined the walls of the dimly lit hallway. He gestured for the group to follow. Inside, the air was heavy with the stench of oil and damp concrete. The team moved silently, their breaths shallow as they navigated the labyrinthine corridors. They encountered guards twice, and each time, Caleb dispatched them with swift, calculated movements, demonstrating his years of experience. As they reached the staircase to the second floor, Peter held up a hand, signaling for the group to stop. Voices echoed faintly from above, men talking, their words indistinct, but their presence unmistakable. "We'll have to split up," Martin whispered. "Peter, you and Isabel take the left side. Caleb and I will handle the right." Isabel nodded, her expression resolute. "Be careful." They parted ways, each pair moving with deliberate precision. Caleb and Martin crept along the right corridor, their footsteps muffled by the worn carpeting. When they reached the final door, Caleb paused, his hand resting on the handle. "This is it," he whispered. Martin nodded, gripping Caleb's shoulder briefly before drawing his weapon. "On three." Caleb pushed the door open just enough to peek inside, his breath hitched. Mary was there, slumped against a chair, her wrists bound, but her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. 2 guards flanked her, their backs to the door. But it wasn't just the guards. At the far corner of the room, leaning casually against a desk, was Victor Bennett. His sharp suit and cold smile made the hair on the back of Martin's neck stand on end. "We've got a problem," Caleb whispered, his voice tight. Martin's jaw clenched as he assessed the scene. The stakes had just risen, and the margin for error had vanished. There was no turning back now. The dim light from a single overhead bulb flickered, casting shadows over the tense tableau inside the room. Victor's low, mocking laughter echoed as he toyed with a knife, his sharp gaze flicking to Mary, slumped in the chair. "Caleb," Victor drawled, his voice dripping with false amusement, "I wanted to know when you would return." Caleb froze in the doorway, every muscle taut. Martin's hand on his arm grounded him, and he nodded once, silently signaling readiness. "Go," Martin whispered. Caleb slipped into the room, his movements deliberate, while Martin hung back, assessing the guards. "Victor," Caleb said, his voice steady despite the roiling anger underneath. "Let her go. She's got nothing to do with this." Victor's smirk widened, his knife spinning idly in his hand. "Oh, Caleb. Caleb's behavior is consistently predictable. You think you can just walk in here and make demands?" The guards tensed, their hands hovering near their weapons. Martin moved silently along the wall, his steps muffled by the carpet. He signaled to Isabel and Peter, who had flanked the room from the other side. The explosion of action was instantaneous. Martin lunged at the nearest guard, his strike swift and precise. Isabel disabled the second guard with a calculated move. Her gun pressed against his temple as she forced him to the ground. Caleb charged toward Mary, his focus laser-sharp as Victor's knife lashed out. The blade grazed Caleb's arm, but he didn't flinch. His fist connected with Victor's jaw, sending the man stumbling back. Mary let out a soft cry as Caleb crouched beside her, his hands working quickly to untie the ropes, binding her wrists. "Are you hurt?" Caleb asked, his voice trembling. Mary shook her head, her face pale. "I'm fine. Just get us out of here." The sound of approaching footsteps cut through the air. "Reinforcements!" Peter barked, his gun raised toward the door. Victor, recovering from the blow, grabbed Mary by the arm, dragging her up. "You think this is over?" he sneered, his knife pressed against her throat. "Nobody walks away from me." Martin raised his weapon, his hand steady despite the fury burning in his chest. "Let her go, Victor." Victor's laughter was cold, his eyes narrowing. "And if I don't?" Caleb caught a glimpse of Mary's knees, buckling slightly, and her weight shifting. His heart twisted, but he knew what she was doing, trying to make herself harder to hold. The years of pain and guilt surged to the surface, providing him with fuel. "You destroyed everything," Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion. "I trusted you, and you used my family as pawns, but no more." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Touching, but I still hold all the cards." The tension crackled with the intensity of a live wire. Then, the distant wail of sirens pierced the night. Victor's expression shifted, the first hint of unease creeping in. "You called the cops!" Victor spat, his grip on Mary tightening. "They'll be here any second," Isabel said evenly. "You can try to run, but you won't get far." Victor's jaw clenched, his eyes darting to the door. Before he could act, Caleb surged forward, his hand striking Victor's wrist and knocking the knife to the ground. The two men grappled, their struggle a blur of raw desperation and anger. Martin and Peter subdued the remaining guards, clearing the room just as uniformed officers burst in, weapons drawn. Victor, pinned beneath Caleb, let out a frustrated roar as the cuffs snapped around his wrists. As the chaos settled, Caleb slumped against the wall, his chest heaving. Mary knelt beside him, her hands cupping his face. "You came back," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I promised," Caleb murmured, his voice breaking. Martin watched from a distance, his relief tempered by the sight of Caleb's weary form. Isabel approached him, her gaze steady. "We've got enough evidence to bury Victor," she said. "We've completed his operation." Martin nodded, but his eyes stayed on Caleb. "What about him?" Caleb pushed himself to his feet, his arm around Mary for support. He turned to Martin, a faint smile on his lips. "I'm not running anymore." "You don't have to do this," Martin said, though he already knew Caleb's answer. Caleb shook his head. "I do. For them." He glanced at Jason and Ashley's photo still clutched in Mary's hand. The weight of his choices hung heavy in the air, but Caleb stood taller, his resolve unshakable. As the officers led him away, his gaze lingered on Martin. "Take care of them," Caleb said softly. "I will," Martin replied. Martin felt a surge of hope as Victor's empire crumbled around him, forcing him into the back of a squad car. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, there was a path forward. The dawn broke over the city, bringing with it a tentative sense of hope. For Jason, Ashley, and Mary, it was the start of a new chapter. And for Caleb, it was a step toward redemption. The reunion at Maple and Oak was a bittersweet contrast to the chaos of the previous night. Mary sat at a corner booth, her arms wrapped protectively around Jason and Ashley. Jason clung tightly to her waist, his face buried in her shoulder. Ashley sat on her lap, her small fingers tracing the tear-streaked lines of Mary's face. "You're here now," Jason whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "But where's Dad?" Mary's grip on him tightened, her breath hitching. "Your father. He had to go away for a little while," she said gently, her voice breaking. "But he did it for us, to keep us safe." Jason pulled back, his face streaked with tears. "He promised he'd come back," he murmured, the words heavy with quiet despair. Mary cupped his face, her own tears falling freely. "And he will, Jason. He'll come back when it's safe. Until then, we have each other." That's what he wanted. Martin stood nearby, leaning against the counter as he watched the scene unfold. His heart ached for Jason, but there was a flicker of relief in seeing Mary's strength as she comforted her children. He knew Caleb's absence would leave a void, but this was a start, a fragile thread of hope to hold on to. Over the next few days, Martin worked tirelessly to stabilize the aftermath of Victor's downfall. The media swarmed the story, hungry for details about the crime lord's arrest and the mysterious team that had taken him down. Isabel expertly managed the legal fallout, ensuring Victor's remaining operatives were exposed and brought to justice. In the quieter hours, Martin focused on Jason and Ashley. He noticed Jason's lingering sadness, the way he retreated into silence whenever Caleb's name came up. Determined to give the boy something to hold on to, Martin invited him into the kitchen one evening. "Come here," Martin said, handing Jason a clean apron. "You've been watching me cook for days. Time to get your hands dirty." Jason hesitated, his small hands clutching the apron. "I don't know how, Ma," he said quietly. "You'll learn," Martin replied with a small smile. "Everyone starts somewhere." Jason slowly nodded, stepping up to the counter. Martin showed him how to chop vegetables, his movements slow and deliberate as he guided Jason's hands. By the end of the evening, Jason's tentative smile returned, a small but significant victory. Mary, too, began to rebuild. With Martin's support, she secured a small apartment near the restaurant and focused on helping Ashley adjust to a sense of normalcy. She spent her days volunteering at a community center, channeling her grief and resilience into helping other families in need. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for," Martin told her one afternoon as they sat in the restaurant's quiet dining room. Mary smiled faintly, her eyes still tinged with sadness, but brighter than before. "I had to be, for them." Caleb's cooperation with the authorities led to a reduced sentence, 10 years instead of the life sentence he had feared. His testimony and insider knowledge dismantled much of Victor's network, leaving the once untouchable crime lord powerless behind bars. Though Caleb's path to redemption was long, his resolve remained unwavering. One evening, after closing the restaurant, Martin found Isabel waiting by the bar. She was nursing a glass of wine, her sharp demeanor softened by the dim lighting. "You don't usually stop by without a reason," Martin said, sliding onto the stool beside her. Isabel smirked, swirling the wine in her glass. "Can't a prosecutor enjoy a quiet drink?" Martin raised an eyebrow. "You don't do quiet." She laughed softly, the sound surprising and warm. "Maybe I'm learning." For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, the weight of recent events lingering but less oppressive. Finally, Isabel turned to him, her gaze steady. "You did a good thing, Martin. You gave them a chance." Martin shrugged, but his smile was genuine. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Don't sell yourself short," Isabel replied. She hesitated, then added, "You're not bad at this whole hero thing." Martin chuckled, the sound low and easy. "I'll take that as a compliment." As their eyes met, a quiet understanding passed between them, a connection forged through shared struggle and a deep, unspoken respect. For the first time in years, Martin allowed himself to think about what might come next, not just for Jason, Ashley, and Mary, but for himself. The future was uncertain, but it held possibility. The late summer sun bathed the prison courtyard in golden light as Caleb stepped through the heavy metal gates, a free man for the first time in a decade. Years of separation from his family had worn his face, yet his eyes glowed with hope. Just beyond the gates were the people who had held him through every doubt. Mary stood at the front, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes brimming with tears. Behind her, Jason, now 20, stood tall and confident, his chef's coat crisp and clean. Ashley, a vibrant 14-year-old, held onto Mary's arm, her wide smile shining as brightly as the sun. "Dad!" Jason was the first to move, crossing the distance in a few swift strides before wrapping his arms around Caleb. The embrace was fierce, unspoken words of relief and forgiveness passing between them. Ashley joined seconds later, her laughter mingling with tears as she clung to her father. Ashley's hesitant voice broke the moment. "Daddy!" Caleb turned to her, his face breaking into a grin as he crouched, arms wide open. Ashley ran to him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I missed you so much," she sobbed. "I missed you too, sweetheart," Caleb whispered, holding her close. "Every single day." Mary stood a few steps back, her lips trembling as Caleb rose and approached her. "You ensured their safety," he uttered, his voice barely audible above a whisper. "You kept us all together." "We survived," Mary replied, her tears falling freely as Caleb pulled her into his arms. "Because of you." The weeks that followed were filled with healing and rebuilding. Caleb found solace in the small, quiet moments, helping Ashley with her school projects, watching Jason work alongside Martin in the kitchen, and sitting with Mary late at night, reminiscing about the life they had lost and the one they were determined to reclaim. Jason flourished under Martin's mentorship. His passion for cooking had grown over the years, and now, standing in the bustling kitchen of one of Martin's restaurants, he moved with practiced ease. Tonight, however, was special. It was his debut as a chef, presenting his first signature dish. The celebration at Maple and Oak that evening was intimate, but filled with warmth. Martin had closed the restaurant for the occasion, the soft glow of candlelight casting a serene atmosphere over the long dining table. Jason stood in the kitchen, his hands steady as he plated dishes with precision and care. His first signature creation, a herb-crusted salmon with citrus glaze, was a symbol of his journey, a blend of resilience, creativity, and the lessons Martin had taught him. Martin watched from the doorway, pride swelling in his chest as Jason carried the plates to the table. The young man's smile was infectious as he set them down, explaining each element of the dish with a quiet confidence that had once seemed so far away. "You've come a long way," Martin said later, pulling Jason aside as the others laughed and talked at the table. "Your dad would be proud." Jason glanced over to where Caleb sat, his arm draped protectively around Mary's shoulders as Ashley animatedly recounted a story. "I think he is," Jason said softly, his eyes shimmering with emotion. "And so am I." As the evening wound down, Martin found himself standing by the balcony, the cool night air brushing against his face. He turned as Isabel joined him, her presence as steady and grounding as ever. "Quiet moments suit you," Isabel teased lightly, holding a glass of wine in her hand. Martin chuckled, shaking his head. "You say that, like I'm always in chaos." "Not always," Isabel admitted, her smile softening. She glanced back at the table where the reunited family sat, their joy palpable, even in the dim light. "You made this happen, Martin. You gave them a chance to heal." "We all did," he corrected. "You were just as much a part of this." Isabel tilted her head, studying him for a moment. "What's next for you?" Martin leaned against the railing, his gaze drifting to the city lights beyond. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But for the first time in a long while, I feel like there's something worth looking forward to." Isabel placed her hand on his, the gesture quiet but deeply meaningful. "You deserve happiness too, Martin." He turned to her, their eyes meeting in the quiet intimacy of the moment. "Maybe I've already found it." The evening ended with a toast. Jason raised his glass, his voice steady and filled with gratitude. "To family," he said simply, his eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. "To the people who stood by us when things were darkest, and to new beginnings." As glasses clinked and laughter echoed through the room, Martin felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. The journey had been fraught with danger and pain, but it had led to this, a moment of healing, of connection, of hope. And for Martin, standing beside Isabel with Jason, Ashley, Mary and Caleb before him, it was enough. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.